All right, Jackson. So you're a student at Harvard Divinity School. Is that how you frame it?
Yeah, yeah. I'm currently a master's student. I'm set to graduate in May. I'm pursuing a master's in theological studies, and my focus is history of Christianity. So I'm primarily interested in Armenian religious history and the development of the Armenian Christian tradition, but I also do Mormon studies on the side as well.
Yeah, and you're Latter Day Saint, but you're
Yes.
back and you're raised in the church, right?
Yep, yep. Raised in the church. Did come from a kind of a mixed faith upbringing during my teenage years. Which is kind of what got me interested in religion and interfaith activism and whatnot. Um, and yeah, so it's been a really fun journey since that point, and I've been having a great time at the Divinity School.
Nice. Was there like a moment that you decided that the Harvard Divinity School was in your future, or
Well, I will say that when I got accepted, one of the things that I posted online was a picture of me from a decade prior when I was like 12 or 13, wearing a Harvard shirt and an ASU hat, and has matched my academic journey. I did my undergrad at Arizona State University, and in religious studies and history. And yeah, so I honestly I did not necessarily believe that I would go to Harvard one day, but it's been a kind of a dream come true.
yeah?
Being able to study here and be connected with all the wonderful, brilliant folks.
So what's it like being a Latter Day Saint? At Harvard Divinity School.
Yeah, I'm currently the president of the Latter Day Saint Student Association at HDS, and I can say in the last couple of years we've had the largest LDS cohort move through the Divinity School. We represent roughly 3 to 4% of the student population, I would say. We have about 6 or 7 LDS students right now, as well as 2 staff members and then a faculty member, David Holland, the son of Elder Holland.
Oh yeah.
Um, and in fact, just a year ago, he was serving as the acting dean of the Divinity School. So besides his impressive academic status, he's well respected in the school, and HDS has been kind of the alma mater of a number of other Latter Day Saints, Philip Barlow. Um, uh, Kate Holbrook, Taylor Petrie, etc. So yeah, it's a good time, I would say.
Yeah.
Some folks might have maybe misconceptions or be a little like weary of the idea of I don't know, graduate studies in religion, but I have only felt encouraged in my faith and in my scholarship by my peers and by my professors at HDS. And in fact, I've ended up doing more work with Mormon studies than I originally anticipated, just because of the at the encouragement of my professors and peers.
Oh wow. I bet those conversations in those circles are just fascinating. When
Oh,
you,
oh yeah.
yeah.
And the Divinity School is so religiously and academically diverse. About half the students are heading in a pastoral direction, getting a Master's of Divinity. The other half, roughly, are doing what I'm doing, which is a Master's of Theological Studies. It's the more academic track. But you have people of all different religious traditions represented, and they are applying their studies to the intersection of religion and law, religion and agriculture, religion and medicine, so many different fields. So it's just been great to be able to develop relationships with really smart, passionate, spiritually minded folks who are, committed to the intersection of scholarship, public work, and maybe whatever faith tradition or lack thereof they might represent.
Do you have a specific career path in mind once you graduate there?
I would like to stay in academia.
Mhm.
I'm interested in public scholarship, but like I mentioned, my primary interest is Armenian studies. So I would love to continue to
Mhm.
lean into that field and pursue different research opportunities related to Armenian history. Yeah, so I'm hoping to stay in kind of the route of research and publishing and teaching, hopefully.
And do you have a specific connection with the Armenian history or culture?
Yeah, I served my mission in Armenia
Oh,
and
okay.
had the opportunity to learn the language and really fall in love with the people and
Mm,
their culture and rich religious heritage. Armenia is the first officially Christian country in the world. They became Christian in 301 AD, so they just have such a rich heritage of Christian identity, and they're in such an interesting area of the world, bordering Turkey, Azerbaijan, Iran, and Georgia. It's kind of like right there. It's technically Eastern Europe, but it's kind of like Western Asia and Eastern Europe and Middle East. It's the Caucasus region is just quite historically and politically interesting.
wow. What was it like preaching the gospel there? Were they more receptive, or was it a typical European mission?
The vast majority of Armenians identify as Christian, even if they may or may not be practicing.
Yeah.
So to be Armenian in many senses, because it's so deeply ingrained in their sense of ethnic and cultural identity, is to be Christian. Um, and so that made it easy in the sense that if we wanted to have conversations about Jesus, many people were always willing to have those conversations. We had to specify we weren't Jehovah's Witnesses first. That tended to help us. Um, but yeah, as far as I don't know, extending the invitation for baptism or considering uh, offering the invitation for them to maybe consider a new branch of their personal journey of faith, that could be more difficult. Um, Armenia is technically, well, they have non-proselytizing rules there by law. And so we would have to wait for people to approach us on the subject of religion, which I kind of liked, because we would, if we ever went door to door, our first question was, how can we serve you? Are there any service projects we can do? As opposed to, I don't know, some of the approaches that sometimes can put the emphasis on their reception to the message rather than the relationship and opportunity to
Mm,
help.
yeah. So did you wear name badges and look like traditional missionaries,
Yeah,
or?
yeah, we did. Which in
Yeah.
that part of the world, led to some accusations of being spies or CIA agents.
Yeah.
But no, we were treated very kindly. Armenians are deeply, deeply hospitable people. So it was a very enjoyable and formative experience for me.
Yeah. Wow. Well, the reason I wanted to jump on the call with you and record a quick interview here is I guess you recently wrote an article for the Harvard Divinity Bulletin. Is that
Mhm.
essentially the journal for the Divinity School?
Yeah, it's an academic magazine, and so they publish twice a year. They have a what is it? It would be a spring, summer, and a fall, winter edition. And so I offered a review piece titled "Mormonism: The Most American Religious Other," which provides an overview of kind of the perception and place. Of Latter Day Saints and Mormonism in within Western pop culture. Um, and my interest in kind of pursuing this article was brought out of the opportunity to attend the premiere of Under the Banner of Heaven,
Mm,
held in Salt Lake City earlier this year. Um, and so originally I was hoping to do a review piece specifically on Banner, the drama series from Hulu FX, but it quickly turned into a much larger overview as more and more uh, kind of high profile uh, treatments or engagements of Latter Day Saints, Mormonism, different parts of Mormon culture have been released through different streaming services or just through
yeah.
the big screen.
Yeah. And what was it like, or how did it come together for you to go to the premiere? Was that, I mean, how how did that happen?
Yeah, well, I engage widely across a number of different Mormon adjacent circles, including Sunstone in the past. And it was through my connection with Lindsay Hansen Park, the director
Mm.
of the Sunstone Education Foundation, that I was able to, get the invite to attend. Um, and yeah, it was a really interesting experience. I had read Under the Banner of Heaven before. I read it again on the plane in preparation, and so we were able to see the first two um, episodes of the show a couple days before they were officially released. And in attendance were members of the cast, including Andrew Garfield and Sam Worthington, as well as others. And the director, Dustin Lance Black, was in attendance as well. So
Yeah.
after the screening, we were able to listen to a cast and Q&A, with Dustin Lance Black as well.
Nice, nice. And for those, I don't know. I watched the series and I'm familiar with Under Banner of Heaven. But if someone's listening and they haven't heard of the book or the series, how would you summarize what Under the Banner of Heaven is?
Yeah, well, it is the show is an adaptation of a book published in 2003 by John Krakauer, who quite the well known writer and novelist. Um, and the timing of his work on Under the Banner of Heaven followed both the events of 9/11, but also came right before some of the very high profile coverage of Warren Jeffs and the FLDS and the various associated raids in the early mid 2000s with that group. Um, and so, Under the Banner of Heaven, to this day, has maintained a significant status and level of prominence. On Amazon, for instance, it's been the number one bestseller in Mormonism for years and years. Um, and so this dramatic adaptation of Krakauer's work, the story essentially covers the uh, uh, horrific events which took place in Utah in the mid '80s, in which members of the Lafferty family, who originally had been mainstream, albeit rather very, very, very conservative, hyper orthodox Latter day Saints, eventually took the path of fundamentalism and religious extremism. And as a result, Brenda Lafferty and her small child were killed, murdered, and in a really gruesome way. And so, Under the Banner of Heaven, both the show and the book tried to provide a level of historical and cultural contextualization to the murders and the trials that followed.
Yeah. Now, pivoting back to the article you wrote, as you approach this topic, what's the general premise, or what question were you trying to answer through the article?
I would say the stance of the article is one that attempts to answer the question of how Latter day Saints are viewed through popular media. And so, by adopting media as a lens through which to consider that, especially in the wake of, we're now a decade removed from Mitt Romney's presidential campaign and from the Mormon moment of the late 2010s or 2000s, I guess. Um, I'm trying to ask the question of, okay, what, if anything, has changed? And by paying attention to media coverage of Latter day Saints, um, what can we glean from their place in the American mind or the Western mind, as well as how does the history of Mormonism and its development as a religious tradition, especially in an American context, factor into its present status?
Yeah. And do you feel like, because oftentimes this is framed as the Mormon moment part two, right? That all this media and these series, often whether they're documentaries or dramatizations or whatnot, but there's this focus or flavor of the Latter-day Saint, Restoration, Mormonism tradition. Um, do you feel like or part of your articles just addressing that we're sort of the last religion that it's okay to sort of pick on or make light of or put in these dark places?
Well, I would say that Mormonism, from what I argue, occupies a space of double identity in
Mm,
popular culture. One in which it has often been recognized as the most American religion, which is kind of where the title of my piece comes from, inspired by an article written by McKay Coppins in the
mhm,
Atlantic a year or two ago. Um, and for decades, various scholars have identified Mormonism as a quintessentially American religion. And yet, I also explore the other sense in which Mormonism simultaneously is the most American religious other,
mm,
where yes, it is recognized as having this distinctive, quintessential American quality to it. Yet that recognition does not come paired with Mormonism occupying or largely enjoying throughout its history a place within the mainstream. And so it's trying to explore both sides of that coin, and the sense in which Mormonism, over the course of its development, has made different moves to assimilate into broader American culture, and where the various tensions and holdouts still are with respect to it being recognized or granted a truly mainstream level of acceptance.
yeah. And do you think I'm that as far as that reach for mainstream, it feels like, from inside the church, we as members of the church, we sort of want that mainstream recognition. And I think that's where the Romney campaign was sort of so validating for us as a group of people. So like, yeah, they're finally seeing us. They'll finally put us on pedestals like the run for the presidency and whatnot. Um, and so I'm just curious, like, why do you what is it more our fault as members of the church of maybe wanting that mainstream too much, or is it more of just the secular world in our country rejecting any religion, even if we say that we are American?
Yeah, it's certainly been the case throughout our history that Mormons, Latter day Saints, have been subjected to, especially in the past, pretty heightened levels of marginalization. Of course, as members of the church, we speak often about the persecution in the early church. And these forms of marginalization hit our community in a number of different ways, which I outlined in my article. This marginalization has occurred on racial lines, economic lines, theological lines, social lines, political lines. Um, and it's there's a kind of paradox in our own conception of self, right? We do view ourselves as peculiar people, and we often espouse rhetoric that we are in the world but not of the world, right?
Yeah.
And so this sense of having one foot in, one foot out, even though we adopt, I would say, sometimes similar takes on our own sense of place. I think the disconnect is that the ways in which that's actually negotiated or played out within broader American society doesn't always occur on the terms we would like it to. Um, and so throughout our history, we have collectively as a community made moves that have facilitated or helped us to gain higher levels of mainstream inclusion or acceptance. But I what I argue is that we still have yet to reach perhaps the level of I don't know, mainstream respect that we might want. You mentioned the Romney campaign, and while that was very much a watershed moment, um, we did see rhetoric about questioning the viability of running a Mormon candidate.
Yeah.
For the presidential office. Similar questions that JFK faced as the first Catholic president. People questioned whether or not a Mormon could truly be, sufficiently loyal to the interests of the United States over and above his own religious community and tradition. So there remains a certain sense of distance, of suspicion, perhaps sometimes outright hostility that I think Latter Day Saints face. That while, especially nowadays, in popular treatments of religion, two highly common kind of tropes or lanes through which religion is treated, on Netflix, Hulu, etc., would be religious exit narrative or true crime. Um, yeah, we have yet to kind of break out of the predominance of those roles in displaying and depicting members of our faith.
Yeah. Is there any message you would have for Hollywood or some of these filmmakers that are producing this type of content?
Yeah, I just think the Mormon world is diverse. There's a lot of rich stories, and I certainly don't deny the potential importance or validity of the stories that have been told so far with respect to perhaps moments of religious violence or scandal or the covering the faith journeys of those who perhaps part ways with our tradition. But certainly when depictions of our community, like with other religious minority groups, are isolated to those lanes, it communicates something, I think, to the larger public, and often serves to reinforce certain tropes, certain perceptions that certainly they're not flattering, but I think they fail to capture the true lived religious experience of kind of the Mormon faith. So um, I'm all for fresh creative depictions highlighting other aspects of lived Mormon life. In the article, for instance, I point out the character of Susie in the Stranger Things seasons 3 and 4,
Mm,
where I guess what made her character so compelling for me. She's depicted as a Latter Day Saint, living in Utah, Salt Lake City in the mid '80s. Um, and yet Mormonism is never the focus, right?
yeah. It's
She's
always
just
in the
able
background, right?
she's just able to exist, right? She's
Yeah.
able to be her own character. And for those of us who are familiar with the faith or perhaps members ourselves, you can certainly identify different ways in which her assumed faith background informs her character and her family dynamics and the ways in which she engages with the other characters of the show and the wider plot. But at the same time, I think what makes her compelling, is that she's just able to be a Mormon, right? And the emphasis isn't on Mormonism itself. So, I think that kind of space, where in a number of other treatments of religious figures in cinema, right? There's a level of latent Catholicism or latent Protestantism or Judaism or something like that, right? Where these characters are allowed to, just be identified as such without that being the overwhelming emphasis. I find that personally refreshing. But at the same time, I think there are certainly stories to tell, breaking outside of the predominant track so far, where Latter Day Saints have been depicted as victims of, perpetrators of, or accessories to violent crime or criminality, or perhaps dissidents from their faith tradition. So
Yeah.
yeah, certainly more stories to be told.
That's cool. Well, Jackson, anything, any other point or principle that we haven't touched on that would help people, that would, encourage people to go read your article?
Yeah, one thing I will say is that part of this issue that I see with respect to the uh, uh, kind of singular lanes in which Mormons are presently depicted in the media. I think we have to be more and more bold in telling our own stories, right? We have to break outside of the conventions that we have historically limited ourselves to in many respects. Um, the I think many of us have kind of favorite shows or movies in kind of the LDS cinema world, right? I'm thinking like the best 2 years or the Singles Ward or something. But those can tend to be fairly inaccessible to outsiders, right? We have to be more and more willing to tell our own stories in creative and dynamic ways that help reveal the parts of ourselves that we would like to discuss and present to the wider world, but without, having perhaps qualities to them that come off as overtly, proselytizing or preachy or something like that, right? I think it is clear that religious characters and religious plots are still very compelling to wider audiences, of people who don't necessarily belong to those groups themselves. But we have to be able to tell those stories in a way that's palatable to external audiences, but are stories and narratives that we feel represent authentically our own lived experiences. So
Yeah.
it kind of runs in both directions, right? But I'm optimistic that it can be done, and that it will take I don't know, the just the creation of the right stories to break out of those lanes.
Yeah, as you say that, my mind goes to just the recent success of The Chosen,
Yeah,
which is a dramatization of the life of Jesus, and they've just released their third episode, and I'm a big fan. I mean, obviously being very Christian, and I've really enjoyed following that series, and it's interesting to see the success because it is. I mean, by far, it's definitely pro, Jesus, pro Christian. But nonetheless, they've approached it in a way that's captivated an audience, not just in Christianity, but I've heard many stories of other people just being intrigued by it. And it makes me wonder what our faith community or those, you know, filmmakers within our faith community could produce, even that type of a dramatization of maybe church history that maybe shows a little bit more of a rugged look at Joseph Smith, or doesn't just paint him as the George Washington perfect figure of our church history, but really shows the struggles and the dynamics there. But anyways, but there's also that feeling of sometimes Christian filmmakers, they push that agenda so hard that you lose any character development and
right, right.
all the stuff that makes a great series or movie or whatnot. But yeah, it makes me wonder what we can learn from what The Chosen is doing and applying it to our faith tradition. So
Yeah, certainly. I've long joked that I would love to see a kind of like HBO drama series of the Nauvoo period, or the early Utah period. But
yeah,
honestly, maybe after Banner or some of these other treatments, I'm a bit more hesitant now at my openness of that. But I can be
yeah.
kind of a stickler on how we're represented. But that just kind of comes with belonging to the community and identifying with the tradition.
Yeah, for sure. Well, where would you send people to go find your article?
Yeah, you can just type in Harvard Divinity Bulletin into any search engine. The website should come up pretty immediately. It's bulletin.hds.harvard.edu. And just right on the front page, if you scroll down, my article will be present in the review section. So there's an image from Under the Banner of Heaven on there. And like I said, the title is Mormonism, the Most American Religious Other. So yeah, feel free to check it out, reach out, comment. And I'm just grateful to be able to be part of this broader conversation in which, many folks have offered commentary on the recent Mormon moment too, right, that we've been seeing in media coverage.
Yeah. Well, Jackson, good luck in school there at the Divinity School, and keep us posted on things you're learning, other things you're writing, and we'll definitely check it out. So.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks so much, Kurt. Really appreciate it.